Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Sunday for Sunday, March 13th, 2022. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got members of the media, academia, and financial services all standing by to analyze all the news and events this week in lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more. So sit back, relax, enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. Well, let's kick off the show with a look at what's happening on Capitol Hill. Joining us on the line, they're known as the Legal Eagles, but they're also known as Dave Libby and Kevin Walsh. Both are principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in good old Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, great to have you back on the program. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having us on, Jeff. You know, it's always good to appear on the program, and as we begin to approach spring, I think there's probably a spring in David and my step today, and it might turn into a fiery little hop.
Well, that'd be good. Well, we enjoy that. It gets us more eyeballs, more earballs, more ears. David, let's come to you because the Department of Labor issued a warning about cryptocurrency in your 401k. What did you guys make of all this?
Sure. Well, first let me put down my NFT trading so I can get to this, Jeff, because clearly I'm not allowed to do that anymore. So let me dive on in. First of all, it's like 2 days in a row. One day we get an executive order from the president talking about the importance of putting the United States first in the area of cryptocurrency. And the next day we get guidance from the DOL saying cryptocurrency is bad. Seems kind of inconsistent, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little.
Because what happened is yesterday, we're recording on a Friday for the audience. The Department of Labor put out guidance that basically said cryptocurrency is not a good investment in a 401k plan. The DOL, and Kevin I'm sure will have comments on this in a moment, basically said, in my mind, almost the first time ever, this asset class does not belong in a plan.
Wow.
They cite the recent Hughes versus Northwestern case for saying fiduciaries need to monitor designated investment alternatives. Crypto usually is often not a designated investment alternative. It's often available in self-directed brokerage accounts. And then says, here's a bunch of things that we think is a problem with it. And then to top it off says, if we see this, we are basically going to consider investigating and exploring and challenging you why it is prudent. It is groundbreaking because this administration is basically, to take the John Roberts statement, is just stepping away from calling balls and strikes and is actually writing the rules of the investment game. It's ironic. It's very interesting. Yeah. Well, let me finish with one comment, Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin, go ahead. This is itching. Go ahead, Kev.
Go ahead, Kevin. I give up.
I was just going to say, Davey, I don't think I've ever seen DOL come out and essentially say, as DOL as an evaluator of investments doesn't think something's good. So I think this was kind of just a bomb out of nowhere. But go on, David.
Yeah. No, and it's also inconsistent. It's inconsistent because, as many of our listeners know, at the end of the Trump administration put out guidance from DOL saying environmental, social, and governance investments almost have a heightened standard if you want to use them as a default investment alternative. There was an outcry over that, and the Biden team pulled that back and said same standards apply. But now that same exact logic is being applied here. I'm not saying crypto is right for everyone. I'm not here to say that. But the precedent it sets is so significant. And Kevin, I'm going to ask you to talk about this because I know you are the guru. What do you think of this being done on a posting on a website?
Yeah, I mean, David, you know how to get me worked up, and I mean, I think if a government's going to come out with rules, there's a process for how you come out with rules. You can either change legislation, which is one way to do it, the easy, like the clear cut. The other way to do it is that you go through notice and comment rulemaking. And the idea is if you're going to tell someone they have to do something or they can't do something, you're supposed to go through notice and comment rulemaking. Here, instead of doing that, what they've done is they put a website update up, which, technically then, you go to a judge and say, hey, look, judge, it's a website update. We don't need to follow this. This isn't binding. But on the other hand, DOL comes out and says, we expect to conduct an investigative program aimed at plans that offer participant investments in cryptocurrencies and related products. Wow. So, I mean, it's a website update, which means that it doesn't have the force of law. But they've come out and said clearly, if you don't follow our fiat, we're going to come after you, and there's going to be legal consequences. And to me, that's just it's bad. It's just bad governance, bad rulemaking. It's got some defects. But I mean, I think David and I don't know if cryptocurrency belongs in a 401k plan in 2022. Substantively, I don't know if I agree with the Labor Department or not. I'm not a crypto expert. But the way they went about this, and then just coming out and saying, we know better than the prudent experts out there who evaluate investments on behalf of plans, to me is just striking.
Gentlemen, can I ask a question before you jump in? And that is,
Sure.
With the executive order from the president, and I know, David, you mentioned this, but it seems like the left hand and the right hand may be a little out of sync because the president issued an executive order around crypto. They need regulation. So in a way, it's almost like tacit endorsement of crypto. And then, hey, but it doesn't belong in 401k. And by the way, from a operational perspective, I'm trying to figure out how you would buy crypto because we don't yet have a spot ETF. I guess you'd have to do it through a self-directed brokerage, I guess would be the way to do that.
Yeah. And that's the way a lot of people
there could be
are
other
doing
ways,
it.
but yeah.
Yeah, that's the way, as Kevin says, there could be other ways there, but that's the way a lot of people are doing it. But let's pull this back for a moment here. Because for our listeners, people may say, oh, well, this is just about crypto. And that's where we say, step back and look at this as a bigger picture from our perspective. Take out the word crypto, because we know some people love, some people hate. But the reality is, this is our regulator who, for the decades that we've had ERISA, has not said one investment is better than another. Through something that has not even had a chance for the public to comment, let alone whether or not they have the authority to say one is better than the other.
Or does that make them an investment advice fiduciary for that matter, David? I mean, you're getting paid for it. You're launching your own cryptocurrency, the U.S. government at some point. I mean, I don't know there.
I hear you. And to that point, let's talk about that for one brief minute. I hear exactly what you're saying, Kevin, but I want to take it back more broadly for the audience for one moment. You may say, okay, well, I'm not interested in crypto. As a listener, we get it. But what about the next investment? For instance, if you're a tech startup company and want to have venture capital in your plan, yes, we know the DOL has said PE can be okay. They've had some, at the same time, their clarification letter. We've talked about it. But we're talking beyond that discussion. What if you want VC, or what if you want like an interesting type of real estate or innovation? There are all these trade groups out there
David,
that are focused. Yeah, go ahead.
We've got plans that have emerging market mutual funds in them.
Correct.
And when I look at a lot of the things they list in this letter, emerging market mutual funds they're a pretty common investment here. But, in light of, wars, country lockups and whatnot, you could see very easily how the things that they're saying require a extreme care instead of, the highest standard under law.
Yeah.
Be applied there, and it's alarming that they're instead of saying you've got to balance the pros and the cons, they're saying here's a list of our fears, and we're going to come after you however you look at this.
Is there a chance that they walk this back? Like how? So you said this is outside the normal process that we've talked about numerous times. Can they walk this back? Is that possible? Pull it back, I guess.
Well, they could withdraw it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But and Jeff, we know we're running long on the time you're kind enough to give us every week, but we could probably talk about this next week.
Yeah.
But there are some other things coming out of the DOL, and it's a very wonky discussion on prohibited transactions and exemptions. But the DOL is clearly heavily refashioning the landscape, and they just put out proposed guidance, and credit to the DOL on that, on how you get individual prohibited transaction exemptions. Although even there are some things that seem like they're sort of already implementing things before the rule goes final. It's a very interesting discussion, and that could throw a major wrench into things like the independent fiduciary market and the valuation market that on which a lot of the retirement system, especially defined benefit plans, rely on for fluidity. So there's a lot going on here. And people like to say, oh, Republicans go this way, Democrats go another. But the reality is, this isn't about politics, and it's certainly not personal. But there's a lot of things changing that could have some dramatic impacts on the system. And you can tell from Kevin and my comments, we're not thinking that they're all for the good.
Yeah, there's a lot of passion there. There's always passion from you gentlemen, but this week, extra passion. We're going to leave it there, gentlemen. Really appreciate you coming on the program. David, Kevin, great to talk to you as always. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will talk to you again very soon.
Thanks, Jeff. And thanks, listeners.
Yes. Welcome back. Now we're time to talk a little tech and consumer products. Joining us on the line, he is the managing editor for TheStreet.com. You can find him there each and every day, talking about Daniel Klein. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the program. This is a twofer this week. We had you on earlier in the week talking about technology to teach, solve illiteracy. Now we got you back to talk a little tech issues.
Jeff, we've solved illiteracy. Now we are moving on to tech. We are fixing all the problems.
I like it. If only life were that simple. But I think people are making going in the right direction, using tech to solve some of society's problems. But it's going to take active work from all of us to do that. Dan, let's talk about Amazon. We were just kind of joshing a little bit in the green room, the virtual green room, that is. We were yapping about this several years back that Amazon was doing pop-up stores. They were, having people, little places where people could come and buy goods. Now they're closing they're closing their brick and mortar bookstores and some of those exact pop-up stores. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I think it's kind of insane. So Amazon
Tell us how you feel, Daniel.
Was building a footprint of bookstores and what they called Amazon 4-Star. 4-Star was sort of like a collection of items, a collection of items that were rated 4 stars. They were really interesting stores. And I could see Amazon pivoting its bookstores to closer to the 4-star model, because maybe books alone, and the bookstores honestly were never pure bookstores. I could see them pivoting to more of a general interest store, but I don't see why Amazon wouldn't want a presence in malls. They were generally going in A-list malls. Those are the malls that are doing well with traffic, some of them hitting all-time traffic highs. It just seems to me a very logical outreach for the brand, another place you can take returns, a way you can sort of remind people you exist. And I understand that people aren't going to forget that Amazon exists, but I don't know, how long was it during the pandemic before you remembered eBay existed and tried to buy stuff there because nobody was buying stuff from them the way they were from other places? I think Amazon needs a physical presence, and I understand they're going to go heavy into grocery, but grocery is really low margin, and selling electronics and books, I don't know. They did a really good job on retail, and I don't understand why you would write that off.
Yeah, it just seems odd to me. Look, they purchased Whole Foods a while back, right? And that seems to has been a decent integration. And look, I think even though we're living this COVID era, people are kind of yearning to get out. I think going to a bookstore or going to a pop-up store in a high-end mall or whatever mall, that just seems kind of cool to me. So I think it's that's an interesting reversal. And I wonder if the new CEO has anything to do with that, maybe, kind of reversing course from what Jeff Bezos and the team decided.
Yeah, well, I think you run into a problem when you're as big as Amazon, and this happens at Apple too, where some of your successes are so minor compared to how big your business is that it almost doesn't matter. I think we saw this with Microsoft closing its retail stores. The reality is Apple's retail stores are the highest sales per square foot of any retailer, or at least they were last time I looked. I don't see why Amazon, which knows an incredible amount of information about people, why they couldn't be that. And here's the reality. There's an Amazon 4-star store at the Gardens Mall, about 20 minutes from where we live. And to me, that's a reason to go to the mall. If I was Amazon, I'd be doubling down on stores and having, big back rooms where I could do fulfillment and returns and all those other things. If I was running Amazon, and Jeff, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Look, I'd buy Kohl's. I'd buy Kohl's. I think they need a way to show off all their owned and operated retail brands This seems like a mistake, and I know it's a rounding error. I know it's not really going to matter in the long-term future of Amazon, but I still think being in front of the public with your best product, and they did retail really well, I think that matters. But this has happened at Starbucks too. Remember when Starbucks had 300 or 400 Teavana locations? Remember when they launched a juice store? Now look, is Teavana or a juice store a very specialized thing? It is. I don't think a bookstore is. I don't think selling all the highest rated items on Amazon is a niche product. So this is a very curious move to me.
Now, Dan, what I would do, I'll get your thoughts on this, is I would set up like a little store in the mall, and I would set up little tablets, little Amazon Fire tablets, where you could go in, talk to a couple Amazon workers, and order stuff. So as you're going through the mall and you want to order those pair of pants, see if you could stop in the Amazon store, you could order that stuff online and still go shopping. That's what I would do. I think that would be a good way to kind of bridge the gap, because look, they're raising their annual Prime membership fee to $139, up from $119, right? So, wouldn't that be a decent strategy? Rather than just have, a retail store where they're having certain products, you go in there and you pick out stuff you like, and it's like that Amazon experience live and in person.
I think that could be a good supplement to what they're already doing. The reality is Amazon had a really excellent bookstore. It was really fun to shop, and they can inform what they have in their store based on the incredible demographic detail they know about your area, about what people are buying. And they did really smart things. Like if there was a cookbook about cooking with the crock pot, it would have the highest rated crock pot right next to it for sale. I would have to think these were pretty high volume stores. The challenge is, and maybe Amazon should have done what Disney did and had a third party run its stores, because it might not be worth it for Amazon to take the brain power to run, a relatively low margin business. But Amazon is desperately trying to build out its physical footprint. I know it thinks it's going to do that with grocery stores, but I'm not sure why Amazon wouldn't want the warm, fuzzy feelings that bookstores create, especially in an era where Barnes & Noble is shrinking and Books A Million, the sort of second tier book chain, I love Books A Million, by the way, is not growing at a super fast level. So many, many markets in the United States just don't have a real bookstore.
Oh man, bookstores! I love bookstores. My wife and I go. We buy books. We like to sit and read books. And look, I think it's a great place to congregate, drink a cup of coffee, have the cerebral talk about this, that, and the other thing. I don't know. Let's see. Maybe they'll reverse course. Dan, let's talk a little bit about tech workers, because we talked about on this show and on the network the great resignation. People just fed up, moving on to other type of work. It looks like the tech sector is leading the charge there. And I really find that hard to believe, Dan, because tech workers, they can work remote. Some of them have to go back into the office, but what do you make up the fact that they are leading the pack when it comes to the great resignation?
Well, Jeff, there's a lot of jobs out there. And I think if you're a skilled tech worker, I think you have the ability to say, you know what, like I'm working 60 hours a week and we're no longer going into the office, and that's a perk, but it's also a negative, because if you work at some of these big tech companies, you're getting lunch. When I was at Microsoft, and I worked remotely, but I spent about a week a quarter in the office. We had 2 different high-end cafeterias. There was subsidized coffee. There were free beverages everywhere. There's childcare, depending where you were. There were gyms and massages. So in some ways, working at home is a positive. In some ways, working at home is a negative. But these can be very demanding jobs. So I think a lot of these workers have the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to leave. I'll find something that's a little bit of a better work-life balance. And I'm finding it. So I'm hiring some people now, Jeff. And the numbers are very high. Even very entry-level workers are asking for, salaries that I didn't make until I'd been in the industry for 10 years. And they want perks, and they're concerned about the balance. And, I'm happy to say that we have a lot of, really great benefits and work-life balance, but that's not true if you go to work for Facebook or Google or Microsoft. So, and again, it depends what team you're on. It depends who your boss is. But the reality is, if there's work out there, maybe you quit your job just because you need a break, because you're going to be able to come back. You might also be able to raise your salary. As I'm sure you know, Jeff, if you get hired someplace at a certain number, and that number becomes below what that job is paying, it's very hard to get a correction. Companies don't usually do that. You're sort of locked into that, 3 to 6% raise every year. And if you were brought in at a number that's, 50% below what they're paying new people, that can become a big problem. And companies don't really address it. And you sort of have to, leave and go someplace else. And then maybe in a year or two, you go back to the first company. Is that ideal? It's not, but it's a really good market. Look, I get headhunter calls 3 times a week. And I've only been in my job for 5 months, so it's not like I'm going anywhere. But it's a really good job market for employees. And I think it's important that employees use that leverage, not my employees, but other employees who don't work for me. I think it's important you use that leverage.
Employees that would work for for you. Dan, how important, you talked about perks. I'm forgetting the pool table, the foosball, the cleaners, or this kind of things. I think those are great perks, but look, they run their course. How important are employee benefits? I want to ask you about this. The 401k, the health benefits, maybe some of the other voluntary benefits that exist, student loan repayment programs. You're trying to attract workers, maybe some tech workers, maybe people in the journalism space. How important, when you were sitting down for an interview, how important are those things to your candidates?
Yeah, it's unbelievably important. So I'm lucky to work for a company that has really good health insurance. We have a bunch of choices. We also have unlimited vacation, which sort of means you could take as much time off as your coworkers will allow, as long as you sort of cover for them when they take time off. But we have mental health benefits. We have a lawyer benefit. We have life insurance. We have, there's generous, maternity and paternity leave. And I think those things are all really important. I think the biggest one, though, is just having a boss that's going to care about how you are. Look, is it fun for me yesterday when I wake up and 2 of my employees aren't coming in for various reasons? No, I have a small team. That means I'm going to work longer. So is everybody. But when someone doesn't feel well, you want them to be able to not come to work. When someone has to do something with their family or their kid, you want them to be able to not come to work. And some of that is about culture. If I don't show up, some of my top lieutenants have to work harder. So I'm conscious of that, but I'm also conscious that, hey, when they don't work, I'm going to have to do stuff. So culture is really important, but the actual benefits, the difference between good health insurance and bad health insurance is really meaningful. The difference between a company that covers you on day one and one that makes you wait 90 days, that's really, really important. So look, I think overall benefits are getting better. I think salaries are getting better. I think we're seeing at the bottom level of sort of, retail and service jobs, that $15 an hour is becoming somewhat the new normal and maybe even going higher. We saw, Target going up to $24 an hour for some jobs. And obviously that's demand driven and market based. So I think we live in a time where workers have a lot of leverage. And as an employer, you really have to think about creating a good environment, creating a place people want to work. Because at some point, especially in the tech world, what else can you do for benefits? And here's the thing. I don't think the average person, even if they go to an office, cares that much if they have a pool table. But they care a lot if they have good child care or, if the company, pays for lunch or has a really good coffee service. Those are the things that sort of put companies over the top. But you got to pay well and you got to have good health insurance because, people don't want to go to work and worry about what happens if I get the flu.
Yeah, Dan, is the shine coming off the tech world? A lot of pressure. You mentioned the work-life balance, and it used to be cool to go to too cool for school to go to Silicon Valley. Is that we've been through this pandemic in which, by the way, the tech world has really benefited, right? Zoom and using Slack and all these other technologies. But has the shine really kind of worn off and people are just like, hey, you know what, maybe I'll go work in manufacturing doing programming or I'll do something else and I'll go away from there?
I think we're seeing smaller companies and startups being able to compete with the bigger companies, not in salary, but in having a reasonable life. Look, there are tech people where I work now. There were tech people at the Motley Fool. And if you work as a tech person at a publishing company, the expectations maybe aren't as demanding as if you're a tech person who works at Facebook or Microsoft or Google or one of these places. I don't want to pick on any of these companies, but I think the days of you show up at 7 a.m. and you're still at your desk at 7 p.m., I think those days are largely gone. And I laugh a little bit because that's kind of what I'm doing right now. But I'm doing it because I'm 5 months into a job where I'm trying to be, culturally transformational. And do I think a year from now that'll be my schedule? I don't. And it's certainly not the schedule I demand of most of my team. So I think we're coming to a place where we realize that work is really important. I would argue that I'm pretty defined by my job. On the other hand, I really make time to have fun and to travel and to do other things. And I think companies they're being forced to be more cognizant of that.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I think this is an ever evolving trend. I think we're going to talk about more of this, not only in the tech sector, but in other sectors as the economy recalibrates, people get back to work or get back to work in the office or splitting time. I think that's going to be a really interesting discussion over the course of the next 12 to 18 months. Dan Klein, always a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks so much for doing a twofer this week. Great to see you and hear you all at the same time, my friend. Take care.
I will see you at the foosball table later.
Yeah, I'll be right there with my pool cue. See you, Danny. Bye.
See you, Jeff.
Welcome back. We're going to close out the show with a look at what's happening in healthcare. Joining us on the line, she's a healthcare editor for Business Insider, Ms. Lydia Ramsey-Flanzer. Lydia, great to have you back on the program. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, great to be chatting.
Great to chat with you. And I have to be honest, there's so much going on geopolitically that I feel like COVID that you and I were talking about at least every other week for 2 years straight has really dropped off the radar screen, at least in the mainstream media. But the vaccines, the variants, I have to think that things are still carrying on. There's a lot of vaccine development, a lot of treatment development going on in that space.
Yeah, we're definitely in a much better spot than we were, a month or two ago. We've seen case counts really drop across the U.S., which is great to see. I think everyone's being a little bit more cautious this time around after experiences with Delta and Omicron. But it's still heartening to see that, at least in my state of Colorado, case counts are at the lowest they've been since last summer, which is great to see. But it presents a really interesting question of what's it going to take to fully feel out of it. And to your point, there's a couple different things that are in the works. One is pharmacies have started making antiviral treatments pretty readily available to anybody who does get COVID. So this would be a pill treatment rather than going in the hospital and getting an infusion. You could just go pick up a course of pills from a pharmacy and carry on your way. There's that piece of it. There's also the piece that gets a little bit more tricky around vaccinating younger kids. Right now, COVID vaccines that are approved are authorized for kids 5 and older, but below 5, that's still a big question mark. So it's kind of going to be interesting to see in the next couple of weeks how we settle that kind of debate.
And how do we match up across the globe with some of our peers? Whether it's Africa, Europe. Are you seeing a recession or I guess that's the right word? Are you seeing kind of the contraction of the number of cases globally as well?
Yeah, I think generally you are. Omicron really took a bite out of a lot of people's, spikes and falls. You see in some other countries really lighten up on a lot of their restrictions. The UK is pretty well known for that. They've kind of taken off masks pretty much everywhere. We haven't gone that far. We actually just continued, I think the Biden administration just put in place a mask mandate for transportation still through April. It was initially going to expire, I believe, next week. So yeah, people are taking different approaches to kind of life after the big Omicron spike. But yeah, globally it seems like we're not as hopefully we never get quite as high as we do for the Omicron spike, but generally the trends are looking good, which is really heartening to see.
Yeah, that is great. And look, you mentioned travel. You still have to wear your mask when you get on a plane. at least domestically here in the U.S. I would imagine train, bus, major mass transit. I guess you still have to wear that, right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. So right now, at least for TSA, so that's the security agency for domestic travel, they're still requiring masks on planes through April 18th or so. And I wouldn't be surprised if that keeps going longer. I know I'm pretty happy wearing the face covering every time I go on a plane these days. It's nice to not get a travel cold. But yeah, I think when it comes to train travel, commuter travel, I believe a lot of that is up to more local jurisdictions. But it's not in bad practice to keep wearing a mask when you're around other people.
Yeah, I mean, it's really effortless to do. I mean, we've all been wearing them. I feel like it's really not a big deal. Let me ask you, I guess, last question. Is there been any assessment or development around the long-term effects of COVID? I don't think we're 2 years plus into this thing. Do we even know what the long-term effects are? I would imagine our scientists, researchers are trying to figure that out. But in terms of like brain health, cognitive function, all other physiological aspects to the human body.
For people who had COVID, or just to society more generally?
Oh no, I'm sorry. For people who have had COVID, not society.
Sure.
I think we know the ramifications of. Well, maybe we don't. We can talk about that second. But let's talk about, do we know the long-term impact of COVID on the human body?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of people. There's been a lot of news around people who have experienced long COVID, this condition of still experiencing brain fog and different symptoms for months or now years after getting infected initially, and that's really a bummer to see. It's definitely been something that's kept me hoping that I don't get sick even with vaccines. I think one of the big things researchers are looking at now is whether or not people can have long COVID symptoms after being vaccinated and potentially getting COVID, or if the vaccine's preventing some of that long-term effect. But it's interesting to see, we're 2 years in, headed into our third full year of COVID, and it's certainly really illuminated to me over the past year or two how serious these infections can be. Even if someone has a mild case, sometimes it can lead to pretty serious long-term effects on their bodies, and so we're still learning a lot about that. The analogy I was hearing the other day was chickenpox and shingles. I feel pretty lucky to have gotten a chickenpox vaccine as a kid, and so I'm not going to have to think about shingles when I get older, is my hope. And so, I'll be curious to see if COVID has kind of lasting impacts in the same way other infectious diseases have.
I have to say that I had chickenpox before there was a vaccine, so I guess, but there is a shingles vaccine that I think is available. I know, yeah. I think my mother and people of her age have gotten it. But I guess last question, this is maybe less of a health, maybe this is more of a mental health question for you, Lydia, so it's not directly related to health care and technology and biotech, but what about the societal impact of COVID? I mean, when do we kind of take away what we've learned, and how does that apply? What does the new world look like? Is it always masks? Is it, what do we take away from all this, I guess?
Yeah, I think as far as, how this has impacted our mental health, I think you can see a lot of that playing out in some of the bigger trends we're seeing of, migration and the Great Resignation, and just burnout in general. I think people are really taking a moment to really reevaluate how they approach their careers and their jobs and their lives, in a way that hopefully leads to, more sustainable approaches. But yeah, as a society, I'll be really curious. I've seen it kind of cutting both ways. There'll be moments where I'm in a packed restaurant and nobody's masked, or I'm at a concert and nobody's masked, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to go right back to normal. But I wouldn't be surprised if we are a little bit more cautious should another pandemic arise. I think hopefully we'll be scarred enough from this one that we'll know how to take appropriate preventive measures if that should happen again.
Yeah, well, you would hope that there'd be some real lessons learned from that perspective. And I guess we shouldn't underestimate, and we'll have to see the mental health aspect to this, especially for kids. I mean, who were going through school, didn't have school, had to work, go to school from home. That I think has been really underestimated. Lydia, we're going to have to leave it there. Always great to chat with you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program, and we look forward to having you back very, very soon.
Sounds great. Thanks for chatting.
Bye, Lydia. Bye-bye.
Great.
That wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest curated news in lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more, and all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to see our latest content or search our archives? Well, check out our website, that's www.broadcastretirementnetwork.com, or our streaming partners like Amazon, Roku, Samsung, and over 100 more. We're back again tomorrow, this time for BRN AM. We'll have a very special guest. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.